Hey everybody, welcome to a new series on CodeIgniter. So a couple weeks ago I posted a tutorial that covered just how to kind of work with it, and many of you noted that it didn't go over how to actually get started with CodeIgniter. So we're going to start a new series, we're going to start from scratch, and we're going to work our way up to building a blog over the course of the screencasts, over the course of the next few months. So we're going to begin by downloading the framework. We're going to look around, discuss the MVC pattern a bit, and then over the next several weeks we will begin to kind of dive deeper, ultimately to the point of creating our blog. And you can see this is actually going to be my blog as well. We will build a kind of a stripped down version. I'm about 70% through with it. Let me zoom out just a little bit. It's built all with CodeIgniter. You can see a lot of this area needs a lot of improvement. But we're going to be doing a lot of fun stuff where we're going to mix a lot of different technologies. For example, we're going to be using the 960 CSS framework. We're going to be using jQuery and a couple plugins. We're going to build our own CMS, so we have all these tables. We're using JavaScript to bring in our latest tweets, and of course we're doing this all in the CodeIgniter framework. Okay, so that's that. You can see here's the database that we'll ultimately end up with. But what we want to start with at first is just getting started downloading the framework. So the first step that you need to do is go to codeigniter.com. The wonderful thing about CodeIgniter is its community. It's just the user guide is unparalleled. If you look at it, you can see it's just really extremely well documented. There's a great forum. So that's the main reason I used it. Also because I'm not totally comfortable using the command line. So if you guys are, you might want to look at a different framework. But this I think is a really good introductory framework, and it's really quite powerful. So the first step you want to do is go back home and download CodeIgniter. Current version at the time of this recording is 1.7.1. So you go ahead and download that, and you're going to get this file right here. So if I unzip that, we can get rid of this, and I'm going to change the name to CI. Now let's open this up. You can see here we have our license, we have the system. This is going to contain our application as well as our libraries. I'm going to pull, a lot of people prefer to pull the application folder outside of the system. I'm going to do that here. Now, and we also have the user guide, so you can have it when you're offline. Great. Now, if we go into our application, you can see a lot of folders here, but don't worry, it's actually pretty well divided. We have our configuration options, which we will go over many of these. We have our controllers. We have our models, and we have our views, so MVC. And then, of course, we have the different languages, we have helpers, and we have libraries that we're going to go over, and as well as some error pages that are made for you that you can redirect users to so that you don't have to create your own. So the first step I'm going to do is I'm running MAMP on this computer. So what I'm going to do is, here is my htdocs folder. I have a bunch of stuff going in here right now, actually. But what I'll do is I'm just going to drag the CI folder in. All right. And now if we go and view this in the browser, we want to go to CI. It says the page you are looking at is being generated dynamically by CodeIgniter. So great, we're already up and running. So let's begin by taking a look at the MVC pattern. I'm going to open up my websites, and I'm going to take the CI folder, and let's just drag it down into TextMate. There it is. Okay. So I'm going to get rid of the license just to keep it clean, but you might want to hold on to that. And the main area where you're going to be working, and I'm going to delete this user guide too. But I wouldn't do that if I were you. I'd keep it in a separate folder. So we open up our application folder, and this is where we would begin. So the first step you might do is create a controller or set the configuration options. But first I want to talk about controllers, models, and views. How does that work? Well, if you've never experimented with MVC, I can guarantee you it's going to kind of mess with your head a little bit because it goes very it's very different from what you might be used to. And basically the idea is it separates the logic into different tiers. So for instance, with your models, this would be responsible for your database activity. So you might have something in a model that connects to a database, retrieves all the records, and then returns it within an array or a variable. Then you have your views, and your views, as you would imagine, are your actual pages. But you don't load a view directly. You would load a view from a controller. So for example, let's say we went to example.com/blog. In order to get to that blog, we'd have to create a blog.php controller. And then within that blog.php controller, we would load the specific view. So I know if you're getting into this, it's kind of confusing. I think it's best if we just go ahead and create our first controller. So I'm going to create a new file, and we're going to call this, let's just call it blog, or let's call it site for now. All right. So remember, this is a class. So we'll do class, and we want to make sure we name the class the same as our file name. So class site, and it's going to extend the controller. So the first thing we want to do is create our index function, and this will run directly when this class is called. So why don't we, for now, just do our hello world. You would never echo anything, but for the example, this is fine. Echo hello world. And so now let's go back to, might have closed that out already. Yep, I did. Let's go ahead and, I'm sorry, I have all these pages open. Let's go ahead and open that once more. Okay, so this is our main page. In order to access that site controller, we got to do index.php/site. Now, index.php can be, we can take care of that a little later. We will remove that. But you notice we're accessing our class like so. So if we wanted to access a method within our class, I have that open too. I'm sorry, I should have organized myself a little bit better. I had all these files open that I didn't know about. So bear with me. Let's open back TextMate. Okay, so once again, let's go to our controller and to our site. In order to access a method here from the browser, we would simply do a slash, and as the second segment, we would type the name of our method. So in this case, it's index. Now, index will run automatically, so we don't need to do that. But for a better example, why don't we create another method, and we'll call it do something, just for example, and we'll echo doing something. All right. Now, to access that method, we would simply type do something. And now we are directed to this page. Now remember, we would never echo anything out specifically from our controller. This is just for example. Instead, we would we might access a database. We'd access a model which would access a database. We'd get those values, and then we'd load a view and send those values to the view. That way, within our main view page, we don't have all of this PHP stuff accessing the database. So, what if you have a method that you don't want the user to be able to access? Maybe it's doing something private. In order to do that, all you need to do is simply append or prepend, for that matter, prepend a underscore. And now, if we come back right here, you can see we can't access it. And once again, if I just remove that, we can't access it. All right. So if you want to make your methods private, be sure to add the underscore. I don't need this, so I'm going to get rid of it. Now, we discussed that we don't want to echo anything out specifically from our controller. Instead, we want to load a view. So let's go ahead and within here, let's create a view. And there are many naming conventions. Remember, the name of the view doesn't matter specifically because when you access a page in your browser, you're not going to be referring to the view file name. You're referring to the controller name, site. So let's name this view, I don't know, let's try home, something like that. And let me add just a little bit of stuff here. I can get rid of that. And within here, we'll just say My view has been loaded. All right, so now how do we load this view from our controller? Well, what we'd want to do is we'd go this load view. So that's kind of nice thing about CodeIgniter. It makes it very readable. We're getting the class and we're going to load a view, and within parentheses we just need to type the name of the view. So within quotes, the name of the view is home. All right. So when the user accesses site/index, all we're going to do is just load a view. So we come down. This is the view that will be loaded. So let's see if that worked. I'm going to come back, close that one out, and get rid of that, refresh, and now we have loaded our view, and we can tell because it says my view has been loaded. Okay, so what's the point? Why not just load a view directly? It goes against the MVC pattern. So the real advantage of this is when perhaps you wanna set some variables, right? Maybe you're accessing a database and you are going to retrieve some rows, and then that will be stored in a array, and you'll pass that array to your view. That way your view is as clean as it possibly can. All right. So why don't we just do this for now? Let's set an array called data. If I can type, and the key. Let's do something like data. My value is going to be equal to some string. Now, if we want to pass this, actually, let's do one more. Data another value equals another string. All right. Now, if we want to pass this array to our view, we simply append it as the second parameter of this view load. In this case, we pass data. Now, we are sending data, an array, to the view. However, once the view is loaded, these values will be able to access just like normal variables. So we would just, within our view, to access them, we would just do, we do my value instead of accessing it as an array, because they will be turned into variables. So now let's check if this works. Let's go in here, and I'm going to create a new paragraph tag. And here within PHP, we're simply going to echo out that variable. So let's echo out my value. All right, so we're going to echo my value. Let's come back to the page, and now you can see some string. All right. So now you notice we haven't set any variable names, we haven't done anything, and this is a very simple example, but typically this is going to be something from a database, or maybe from a submit form or something like that. And also, of course, if you want to do another one, just to make sure it's working, we do another value. Okay. So hopefully you're beginning to understand the advantages to the MVC pattern. So we've created a controller. Now let's say this is the hard part, is try to think of controllers almost as your site. So for instance, let's say you're going to have an about page. You could still store that about page as your controller. So for instance, if I did function about, we could do this.load view about, and let's go here really quickly and create a new file called about, and do that, about page. All right, so now when the user goes to site, let's go back here for reference. When they go to site / and then the name of this method is about, we are going to load a new page. We're not going to load home. Instead, we're going to load this about view. So let's see if that works for us. Let's go as a second segment. All right, so now this would be the equivalent of accessing your about page, and subsequently you could have your contact page, and this is how it would be done. All right, so it's just a little bit of a cleaner way. If you don't know the advantages just yet, I promise you will once you work with it for a while. Even after an hour, I realized, oh, this is the way I want to build websites. So I want to teach you models now, how we can access a database, grab those values, and then return them to a controller. The controller will take those values and then subsequently pass those on to our view. So remember, models is for accessing the database. If you just want to think the D in models, models is for database, okay? So we'll create a new file, and why don't we set this as, I don't know, it can be anything. Generally, you want to set your model, so maybe one model per table is what a lot of people prefer. That's generally what I do. For each table, I'll have my own model. So we could have, you know, we're not working with anything specific, so I'm just going to call it site_model. All right, so the first thing that we want to do is open up our PHP tags. And I wish I had a model to show you. Why don't I show you an example model really quickly? Let's go to my site application. This is the one we're going to be building shortly, and I just want to give you a better example of this. Recent tutorials model. Yeah, this is a section where I'm setting up a table called recent tutorials, and it will list my recent tutorials on NetTuts on my own site. So you can see this is the model. We create a new class called recent tutorials model. Notice that's the same name as our file. And this time it's going to extend the model class. And I only have one function, and I've called it get recent touch. Now, we create a query, and in order to access our database, we just do this db get, and this will allow us, it's kind of a shorthand with active records, to type in the name of our table, and then the second parameter is whether you want it in ascending or descending. In this case, I want to make sure that I show the newest one first, so I'm setting it in descending order. That's going to return an array, and we're just saying if that Q variable, the number of rows, is greater than 0, meaning if something was returned, then we will create this data array and set it equal to each individual row, if that makes sense. So I want to show you this a little bit better example. Let's come back, and we're going to do this from scratch, okay? So let's come back here, and we're going to do class site model extends, and it's going to extend the model class. All right. So within here, we can name a method anything we want. I'm just going to do something like get all. Okay. All right. So first, we need to create a query, and it's going to be equal to this DB. Now, what is DB? DB is a library that can help us. CodeIgniter comes with libraries and helpers that will speed up your development time. So if I come down to library, you can see all these different options that we have. Okay, we have a calendar library, which is actually really nice. We have an email controller. We have loaders, routers, profilers, lots of stuff. And then also we have a helpers. Now these are not object-oriented. They are just a collection of functions that will allow us just to speed up our development time. Kind of a URL helper. I use that one a lot. Date helper, cookie helpers. We'll be going over a lot of these. Now, the next step before I continue on is I want to show you this config folder. You'll spend a lot of time in here, at least initially. This is usually when you start a project, you're going to set up some of your configuration options. Now, when you want to load a library, you would do something like this, load library, and then the name of the library that you want to load, like database. That's how you would do it from your controller or your model. However, a lot of times you'll be using something all the time. It kind of is silly to load it for every controller. Instead, you can auto-load it, meaning when the application first starts, these items will be loaded. Now, we know we're going to be working with a database, so why don't we go ahead and just load that one? All right? And that way we'll have access to that DB. So, database. If we wanted to add more, we would simply add commas and add those. Also, if we have helpers we want to auto-load, like the URL helper, that's one I use often, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that, but don't worry. we'll go over that. I don't think we'll go over that today, though. And also we have plugins. We can load config options, just a lot of options for us. But that's fine for now. The next step is you want to go to your config, and this is where we can set our base URL. Now, the base URL generally is going to be your site name. Because I'm working on my local server, the base URL is going to be this right here. So if we come back, I can just paste that in, and that will be my base URL. Of course, when I upload it to my my actual server, I would change this to, in my case, jeff-wade.com. We can set our index.php page. If we want it to be something different, we can go ahead and change that, and then we'd use a mod rewrite to remove this name. We will go over that a little bit later. And that should be good for now for this, so I'm going to save that. And the next step is I'm going to go into routes. Now, this is where we can route our options. Remember, if we come back, if we just go to our site controller, our root, we're directed to this welcome page. Well, obviously we don't want that. So how can we designate what our default controller is? We do it right here. Root or route, default controller, and I'm going to change it to the name of my controller, in this case, site. All right, so let's go back to routes, and I'm going to change that to site. Additionally, we have a scaffolding trigger. This is kind of a nice feature that I believe has been deprecated, but we're going to still look over that because it's very dangerous if you keep it live, but just for simple edits, it's kind of a nice feature that we will go over after a few lessons. So now if I come back and I refresh the page, you can see that instead of the welcome controller being loaded, instead our site controller has been loaded. So now that we have our database class loaded, let's go ahead and begin working with it. So we're going to do a Q for query. It's going to be equal to this db get. Now, what is get? If you ever have a question and you don't understand something, luckily the user guide is really incredible. So if we go to user guide, table of contents, database class, they just have all of these options. So let's go to quick start. And you can see here, the first step would be to create a variable called query, and then we do this db query, and we can either pass in SQL directly, or we can actually use active records. So let me see if I can find it. Here we go, active record query, and this is just a way that CodeIgniter simplifies the process. Rather than doing select all from my table, we can just use get. Okay, so we do query equals this db get, and then the name of our table. So I can just copy that, bring it back. Whoops. And bring that in, and I'm going to change this back to Q. So what is the name of the table we want to get? Well, we haven't created one just yet, I don't believe. So let's go ahead and open up phpMyAdmin. And I'm going to create, don't worry about any of these other databases. Ours is going to be called a CI series for CodeIgniter series. We're going to create that database, and our first table is going to be called test because we're not doing very much. All right, and the first one is going to be ID. We'll give each one its own ID. So that's going to be set to integer. And if we scroll down, we want to set it as a primary key and also make sure it auto increments so we don't have to set that ourselves. And the next one is just going to be, I don't know, let's say title. Okay, and it'll be varchar 255 is fine. Save. And if we want to insert some records really quickly, you could imagine this maybe is the beginnings of a blog, maybe the title, another title. Go. And now if we browse, you can see we have a few items in our database. Good. So we want to grab the test table from our CI series database. All right. So table name is test. Okay. Now, how does CodeIgniter know how to connect to our database? How does it know which database we're referring to? How does it know our login credentials? It doesn't by default. We have to set that ourselves. And that's where this next file comes in, database.php. So we have some settings. Mostly you'll just be working with these right here. The host name, I'm on my local server, so it's localhost. The username for this, I don't have any security set up, so it's just root and root. And here we can hard code in a database, and in this case it's CI series. So I'll type that in, CI series. Save that, close it out. You'll do that at the beginning and then you won't have to touch it. So now it's knowing, go into the CI series database and grab all of, remember, get is equal to select all, essentially. So we're going to go into the test table and get everything and return it. And that's going to be stored into this Q variable. So let's come back and look at some more. What else would we do next? Well, then we would filter through those rows and we'd say for each query, this is another CodeIgniter method, the result, we'd store that into a row variable and then echo that out. So why don't we just get this, paste it in, all right? And then we'll say for each Q result as row, echo row, and then I think I called mine title as well. Let's see, browse title, yes. So remember, we would never ever echo anything from the model. So let's remove that, and we'd create a new data array, and we'd say row. Okay. So by setting it as an array, for each instance, we'd have a new item in this data array. And then finally, we do return data. Now, also something we'd want to do is make sure, as I showed you before, that we'd want to make sure that the number of rows returned was greater than 0. So we could say if Q result, Q num rows is greater than 0, then do this. Okay. Like so. So if the query, if rows more than 0 were returned, we know we have something to work with. Then we're going to cycle through them, and we'd set a new data array equal to row. All right? So how does the controller know to load this site model? It doesn't. We'd have to tell it to. So let's say, let's get rid of this about method just to keep things a little more simple. And I'm also going to get rid of these right here. So we need to load our model. So we do this, load, and pretty simple, load a model. And the name of the model that we're loading is site_model. Now, just doing that isn't going to do anything for us. If I come back and refresh the page, we get an error, and it says undefined property. So it's saying it's this is another nice thing. It takes care of a lot of debugging for you. So it says line number 6 on site.php. So if we come back, line number 6, this.load model, and of course what we need to do, as you can see, because we got rid of those variables, we can get rid of that. And also we need to go to home and make sure that we're not echoing out any variables that don't exist. And I think that should fix it. If I come back and refresh the page, nope, we're still getting it. So it's saying undefined property. So what we can guess is how I would debug it. If we come back to site, you can see, let's just try commenting this out. And it's being loaded. So we know there's a simple problem with our model being loaded. So let's go back to site model, and we have our function getAll. Let's see. Load. Couldn't read that, it said lad. So let's come back and refresh it, and now we have our view has been loaded. So how can we check to see what was returned? Well, we've loaded the model, but we haven't done anything with it just yet. So we need to actually call one of this model method called getAll. So now that we've loaded it, we can access it like a class. So we can do this site model, and then the name of the method that we want to access. In this case, getAll. Right? But if we run that and we don't set it to a variable, it's just going to dissipate. So why don't we set that as, we'll create another data array, and this time we'll call it records. Okay? And now when we load our view, we're going to pass in that data array. So let's refresh the page just to make sure nothing's wrong. Good. Let's go back to our view, and now we can work with this records set of rows. So for now, why don't we just do something like this. Pre, and let's do PHP, print R, and we're going to print already forgotten what I called it. Records. Okay. And let's just see what's returned. Okay, so what's returned is an array containing our items. So now we can just use a simple for each statement to filter through those. And we can say, actually, let's do this shorthand. And we'll say for each records as row, and for each, and then let's just do a heading. So h1 echo row, and we can access it in an object fashion by doing row title. And let's get rid of our pre. Come back, refresh the page, and now we have accessed our database. So that's as much as I want to get into today, but you can already see the beginnings of the advantages to MVC. Look, we have our view. This is our main page. So imagine maybe the web designer is in charge of this. He doesn't ever have to worry about all of this database access code or all of these I don't know, all of these form submission code, anything. That's not being taken care of in the view. All he has to deal with is just simple PHP that will maybe filter through an array and echo some information out. When we connect to the database, we do that all in our model. And then the controller, think of the controller as kind of like the principal, you know. The controller is the one who coordinates everything. So he'll tell the model to access the database and return some records, and then he'll take those records and then pass them on to the view, and the view will take those records and display them on the page. So this has been your introductory tutorial to CodeIgniter. We're going to continue on. If you guys have any questions, I want this to be kind of a group learning project for all of you that are just getting into this. So just let me know in the comments if you don't understand anything or if you have a tutorial request. And we're going to keep working our way up into building a nice little blog and a CMS. So I will see you guys down the line. Thank you so much. See you in about a week. Bye-bye.